Hello, Scrufftards, Vatniks, and random strangers online. Welcome to the Warzone. I'm Scruffy, and this is Scruffy Tales. And took a while, a week or two, but eventually it does look like Veseloye will fall, and Ukraine keeps advancing in Glushkovo, Kursk Oblast. And the ISW map, it does show some interesting things going on. The other day, we had this update, Russia pushing out to the border here and getting slightly closer to the river Snagost in this area, as confirmed by some other maps as well. But the main thing is what's going on over here around the town of Veseloye in Glushkovo district, Glushkovo county, where Ukraine is about to grab this town, and that will allow them to push further into Glushkovo and forcing Russia to allocate more and more manpower to this region, which should weaken this front, potentially even the rest of the front over here, but most definitely this front. So a huge deal what's going on over here. So we're starting off with that push down here that I talked about. As you can see, this is from a couple of days ago. Ukraine was still in control of the border territory according to ISW. Uh, according to Deep State, that is still the case, as well as with Andrew Perpetua. However, as you can see here, according to ISW, Russia has made a push, some gains that has been confirmed towards this bend in the border, and that is this here on Deep State, and we have the same here on Andrew Perpetua. And this is where the river Snagost crosses into Ukraine from Russia. So Russia has made a push towards the river Snagost right on the border, as confirmed by these three maps: Andrew Perpetua, Deep State, and ISW. And is that important? Yes, it may be. It could be important. It brings Ukraine close to this town. Oh, it brings Ukraine. It brings Russia close to this town, Nikolaevo Darino, right on the border here with Ukraine. It's a small village along the banks of the river Snagost. Up here is another village, Darino. Here we have a bridge crossing the river. And all of these Russian claims, that's why it's yellow, that Russia has crossed the river Snagos hinges on Russia having this bridge intact, more or less. But there's a but, and here at Nikolaevo Darino, take a look at this. What is that? Is that a bridge? I mean, you have this track, dirt track leading down to whatever this is. I don't know, is anything leading through the forest? It's difficult to tell, but that may be a bridge. So this may be a crossing point here at Nikolaevo Darino. And if we're seeing Russian confirmed gains down here, but nothing up around Darino, doesn't that tell us something? That maybe Russia hasn't crossed at Darino? Because we have nothing confirmed saying they have crossed. But we are seeing confirmed Russian advances down here towards Nikolaevo Darino and that small tiny thing, whatever it is, located around here, I think it is. So it kind of puts into question all the claims Russia has made pushing across the river. No confirmation that Russia is up at Darino, but confirmation that they're moving in here towards this small village and maybe this small bridge. So yes, that does, to me, makes me question if Russia has actually pushed out this far east of the Snagos River. I highly doubt it. We haven't seen the confirmed Russian presence moving in quite some time. And when it did happen, it was a move down here with Russia closing in on a potential small bridge. I mean, there should have been confirmations up around Darino, if you ask me, if Russia was indeed well and truly moving troops across the river Snagost and operating east of that river within Ukrainian occupied territory. So I think this push might actually tell us that all of this is well, BS. But enough of that. Nothing else going on the other flanks, more or less. But this is where we will now take a look at Veseloye and Ukraine's push into Glishkovo. Because when the weekend started, Ukraine was struggling a bit. They had territory down here outside of Veseloye to the south. They had some indications that they moved up here on the east, very crucially though, because this allowed Ukraine to cut a vital supply line from Glishkovo into Veseloye. And we had Russian claims that they were operating down here all the way down to the border, which I kind of called into question with Ukraine being able to push up so far on the eastern flank. And here we have ISW removing that claim altogether. It wasn't really substantiated by any other maps either, to be fair. And then this happened, and take a look what has taken place here. Ukraine has made a push on the west, to the west of Veseloye, moved up, come in behind the Russians, and they have, as a matter of fact, now cut all three supply lines leading in to Veseloye. And as we can see here, Ukraine has pushed north of the main road leading into town here. They are, this is a big field, so it doesn't surprise me that this is not in Ukrainian control. This is a big field, open farmland, but they have moved up through Ubikovka, moved past the lakes here and into the northern part of town. And as you can see here, almost reached this bend in the road, and they are slightly west of this crossing here. And we'll use this bend and the crossroad here, and as well as the lake, for reference. When we take a look at a satellite image, bend in the road and the crossroad. And as you can see, Ukraine has moved up through Ubikovka to the west of the lakes, into town, slightly west of the intersection crossroads, and made it all the way up here, slightly west of that bend. And this is really important because this is where we have a mud track. This is where we have another mud track leading into town, from which Russia could support the fight in Veseloye after Ukraine had made this crucial push, cutting the main road leading into town. So with this move, Ukraine has successfully isolated Russian troops in Veseloye from functional logistics. There's still an opening here where Russia can move in forces. They can still move in supplies, but as you can imagine, it's a lot more difficult moving supplies through this terrain than along a main road or along some established mud tracks. Now, these were well and truly mud tracks, not roads, and heavy loaded trucks would get stuck. So I do believe Russia was reliant on off-road vehicles, proper off-road vehicles, to bring in supplies via these two routes. But they are now cut. Russia can't utilize them to supply. Oh, goddamn dog. Anyway, so they are now cut. Russia can't utilize them, and they can't rely on this road either. So that makes it extremely difficult for Russia to defend Veseloye, and it is only a matter of time before Ukraine will secure the entire town. And it's just not lines on the map. We actually have geolocated Ukrainian positions here, here, and here. As you can see, these confirm that Ukraine is moving and operating to the west and north of Veseloye, and they have also pushed out to the east of Veseloye. So, and as you can, lots of blue dots to the south where Ukrainians are moving in and around south of Veseloye. So Ukraine has pushed up to the east, moving northward. They pushed up west, moving northward, and then come in north of the town, just as the maps are showing. And here we have another mapper, Scribble Maps. Haven't used him all that much. Haven't seen this map being used at all that much, to be honest. But this is his map anyway, with Ukraine in control, partial control of Ubikovka, south of Veseloye. But as you can see, he indicates that they have, and this map has been like this for a couple of days, if I'm not mistaken. And it does indicate that Ukraine has pushed up west of the lakes, and we know they've continued northward. And he also has this, and this is kind of interesting, that they have pushed up this far and are operating in this area. True or not, who knows? But since we do know that Ukraine is up here, it kind of makes sense that they would try and push in from the east as well to close the gap here and cut off the Russians in Veseloye. So we shouldn't dismiss this, but it does suggest that Ukraine is making big pushes on the flanks of Veseloye, and it could also be an indication that Russian defenses in town itself are pretty solid. So Ukraine had no choice but to go around to cut off the town from reinforcements rather than trying to push straight through. Maybe something they should have tried from the beginning. But I mean, we're not privy to Ukrainian intelligence, their logistical situation and what have you. So maybe this, and also we have to remember that maps update roughly between 24 to 72 hours after the fact. So what we're seeing now took place a couple of days ago. So, but yes, I think this is interesting, indicating that Ukraine has been moving around on both flanks to cut supplies leading into town. And speaking of maps trailing a bit, here we have the FIRMS maps from the 28th of September. Now, FIRMS is, of course, NASA's service of tracking large fires, and we can rely on those to take a look where we have massed artillery strikes. And here we have Veseloye. And a couple of days ago, as you can see, massive amounts of artillery aimed at that gap that is not in Ukrainian control. Ukraine has moved out this way, and they have moved up to the west and around. So, and in this gap that Ukraine supposedly is not in control of, a couple of days ago, huge amounts of artillery. Does this mean Ukraine is bombing Russians moving in and out, or maybe leaving, or trying to push in? Or is this Russia directing artillery at Ukrainians who are trying to close the gap and encircle Veseloye? Hard to tell, but quite clearly something was going on the 28th of September in that gap that, according to the maps, Ukraine has not yet secured. Just to highlight that it's this gap. I mean, you can see here windbreak and windbreak, these two windbreaks here. And here's that main road leading into town. That's this road. So it is this gap that is not fully in Ukrainian control, that a couple of days ago was hit by massive amounts of artillery. If it's Ukraine striking Russians moving in this gap, unclear. If Russia is aiming artillery to prevent Ukraine moving in and closing the gap, who knows? It could be a combination of both, to be fair. And then we have Scribble maps. It is this area that is contested according to Scribble maps. So maybe that's an indication that Ukraine was moving in, and this is Russia trying to push Ukraine away from closing the gap, as it were. Interestingly, I posted this, I don't know, maybe 20 hours ago by now, that IceW made this update on the map with the Ukraine pushing in on the west of Veseloye. And then this guy, Mr. Custodian, he's this pro-Russian Vatnik apologist, basically. He says he's no fan of Russia hitting civilian targets, but there's always some bullshit reason why that is. So, you know, a apologist. He supports Russia, basically. Anyway, so several sources have already gone public and said that it's captured regarding Veseloye. That include a few pro-Russians. Interesting. And it's based on two geolocations northeast and northwest of town. I think we've taken a look at those. Both in the outskirts. That would indicate it's taken for now. I mean, I guess Russia couldn't reclaim it. And this Russian counterattacks in Novotel put this Novotel put this down here, where Ukraine breached the Russian defenses and the Russian border and moved in. So no, this is not under attack. Russia has not made any counterattack. Ukraine is pushed out from this area and are very much in control of Novotel put. But may now concentrate to counter in Veseloye or pull back towards the fortifications at Sukhanovka, and Sukhanovka is up here somewhere. which is more likely that Russia will fall back to this town, defending this town rather than attacking down here. I agree with that. Russia has some history in this war with defending every inch to the very last man, so they may not yet give up on Veseloye. So there's still a good chance that Veseloye will be a fight that continues for some time, for a couple of days. But in the end, it's gonna fall since they have no supplies leading into town, and then Russia will more than likely fall back to the town of Sukhinovka. And as you can see here, you also have some defensive lines in place between Glushkovo and Veseloye. And if you're pro-Russian watching this and think this is all bullshit, this is Suryak Maps, a very pro-Russian source who does indeed report things from a Russian narrative and from a pro-Russian viewpoint. And as you can see, here's a new put where Russia supposedly was counterattacking. I mean, controlled by Ukraine, you have some contested areas surrounding it, but this is very much Ukrainian territory. And here we have Veseloye, with Ukraine moving up on the east, crossing the road, moving up on the west, securing these two other entry points. And you have this last bit where Russia can move in, and Veseloye is not even red. It's fully contested according to Suryak Maps. So this is a very pro-Russian mapper that has Veseloye as contested, and with Ukraine moving up east, north, and west, and coming in north of town as well. So quite clearly, Ukraine is on a roll and has the initiative, and it is only a matter of time before Veseloye falls. So did Veseloye fall, or did Ukraine have these successes because they started to cut supplies, initially that main road leading into town? I think that's part of it. They cut that main road leading into town, making it difficult for Russia to bring in manpower and supplies via those other two options. Muddy tracks, basically. But there was a third thing going on, or a second thing going on, that I think helped allow Ukraine make that push west and in north of town. And that is what happened outside of Tetkino. Because a couple of days ago, Andrew Perpetua made this update that you had Ukrainians potentially operating north of Tetkino, crossing the river and making this third incursion into Kursk. And then other things started happening. We started seeing a lot of artillery strikes aimed at Tetkino, especially down here, and I mean a lot of it. And then this happened. Russian airstrikes aimed at the border region where you had all those artillery. And these two mappers, Mayakovsk 73 and Scribble Maps, then indicated that Ukraine was making gains across the border along this main highway leading towards Tetkino, as you can see here. And other mappers, Deep State, Andrew Perpetua, and a couple of others, Ukraine Control Map, they all indicate that Ukraine was operating south of Tetkino, and there were reports of Ukrainian infantry pushing across the border since a week or two ago. So things were happening here. And then you had all of the artillery strikes, and then maybe Ukraine pushing in from the south, and Russia allocating airstrikes. I think Russia moved troops from Veseloye and Glushkovo along with vital resources to strengthen and fortify Tetkino, just in case something was actually happening. And that allowed Ukraine to apply pressure in Veseloye, and that allowed them to move up west of the lake and come in north of town. So this road was cut since a week ago, and that made it difficult for Russia to bring in supplies. And then they also had to allocate manpower, important manpower, and vital logistics to Tetkino, weakening Veseloye overall, and that has allowed Ukraine to move in and cut off Veseloye from all supplies coming in from the north. And just to highlight the point, this is the artillery strikes aimed at Tetkino, and this is there's still artillery strikes for about a week's worth. This past weekend and then last week, And as you can see, something was well and truly going on around Tetkino, and I made videos about it and made some community posts about this as well. Something was happening. So it's not strange that Russia allocated manpower to Tetkino along with resources, and that could have opened up for Ukraine to make that push in Veseloye. So I think this could, maybe there was a diversion, maybe there is an actual push to move in, who knows? But I do believe that whatever happened here forced Russia to allocate resources away from this fight all over this way, and now Ukraine has moved here into Veseloye. And what does that mean? It means Russia will have to move resources and manpower from this front all the way to Glushkovo to strengthen Glushkovo and what's going to happen north of Veseloye. I don't think they will give up on Tetkino, because then Tetkino may fall. They still need to have troops over here in case Ukraine pushes in. And that leaves Glushkovo open for further Ukrainian pushes. So Russia has to strengthen this part of the front, and those troops and those supplies has to come from this section here to fill in the gaps after troops were moved to Tetkino. And I mentioned this in the previous videos from last week, that snowball effect when you begin moving troops. I mean, you have to fill the gaps somehow, and those troops will come from over here. So you have a snowball effect leading from this front to Glushkovo all the way over to Tetkino as Ukraine pushes in, applies pressure elsewhere, and now has secured or is about to secure Veseloye. So what's next? Some predictions. Armchair general time. Yeah. Veseloye about to be secured by Ukraine. Russia will fall back eventually. There's no doubt about it. Where will Ukraine go next? Will they go straight for Glushkovo? No, I don't think so. This is wide open territory. You had those defensive lines in between Glushkovo and Veseloye. I think if Ukraine tries to move along the road here, it will be a death trap. I think the initial plan was to quickly move in, secure Veseloye, and push for Glushkovo and have the main fight up here. But since they failed in taking Veseloye and got stuck on this town, they instead had the main fight here instead of up here. And now the moment is gone. They can't push on towards Glushkovo. There's too many Russians in the way at this point. So the initial plan failed since they couldn't take Veseloye. So they have to adapt and come up with something new, and that leaves them with three options, if you ask me. And one option is here, a small town called Glushkovo, just like this big one, but with a W instead of a V when you translate it from Russian to Western standards. So this small industrial town, this is where logistics flow into this entire region for Russia. Remember, Ukraine has blown all the bridges. That leaves only this highway here, going through this small town. So if Ukraine pushes out and grabs that town, they have effectively cut logistics into the entire Glushkovo region, which should suggest that this is pretty heavily fortified and defended by Russia. So that may be troublesome for Ukraine to pull it off, but it is certainly an option. Another option is moving down here to the border towns, because if Ukraine can push just slightly west and grab two border towns on the Russian side of the border, Ukraine can bring in all the supplies, logistics, and manpower they need to keep the fight going in the entire region. They can move in supplies and manpower via the railroad and the road network to these border towns, and then just ship it on out to wherever the front line is at the moment. So this looks like a good option for the Ukrainians as well, a likely option, perhaps more likely than pushing out this way. Third option, going for the next town north of Veseloye. You have cover to move through. Taking it establishes a firm Ukrainian presence right smack in the middle of the entire Glushkovo region. And from here, you can choose to go this way to Glushkovo or to these other two towns up on the River Seine. and you could even move in westward to try and cut off Tetkino. So this is also a likely option for Ukraine instead of going straight for Glishkovo, moving north through the cover and trying grabbing this town. It's going to be a tough fight, needless to say, but if Ukraine pulls it off, they have some good options in moving on, either heading for Glishkovo or these other small towns, or pushing westward to supporting a potential fight over in Tetkino. So these are the three main options Ukraine has once they have well and truly secured Veseloye. And I'm thinking we may see a combination of all three. More than likely, these two will be primary targets for Ukraine, with this being secondary. And then a third option or third objective will be to try and expand close to the defensive lines outside of Glishkovo with no real effort to punching through. These three will be the main objectives, or these two, I should say, will be the main objectives, with this being secondary, and then maybe pushing out up until you reach the Russian defensive lines outside of Glishkovo. I mean, take a look at this, the Glishkovo, Veseloye, and Sukhanovka, north of Veseloye. I mean, wide open fields. And you have the defensive lines located somewhere between Glishkovo and Veseloye as well. Coming this way, along this highway, now when the surprise is gone, the Russians are moving in troops to reinforce the area and stuff like that. It's not a viable option. More cover, windbreaks, and to advance through, it's a safer route for the troops moving from Veseloye to the next point of contact will more than likely be in Sukhanovka. And so, no, I think they will avoid the wide open fields where Russian drones and artillery can take them out. And they will move up this way where there is cover and where troops can potentially even move on foot from Veseloye to Sukhanovka to continue the fight without relying on vehicles. So yes, that's why I think Sukhanovka will be the next objective, and Ukraine will maybe push out to this defensive line just to deny Russia the chance to counterattack along this road. So after Veseloye, we will see a lot of fighting in here between the towns, and then as Ukraine begins to push in towards Sukhanovka itself. So how important is Veseloye, that tiny town located right here? It's super important because, like I've pointed out, it allows Ukraine to move on, which should force Russia to move more forces away from the fighting over here into Glishkovo, which should make it easier for Ukraine to hold the line over here. And if Ukraine gains territory, and if Ukraine holds on to territory, and Russia has to spread out, meaning they need even more manpower from elsewhere, it will force Russia to move troops into this area from other places, and potentially the front line down in Ukraine, which is the goal of all of this. And if Ukraine can hold out in Kursk long enough, say well into 2025, which I think will happen, that may even force Russia to move troops from the Pokrovsk campaign to hold other front lines and to potentially even fight up here in Kursk. And all of that begins with Ukraine taking this small town. Taking this town sets things in motion, I should say. Now Russia will move forces away from here to over here. Russia will struggle pushing Ukraine out, so they need more troops. Those troops needs to come from somewhere, and the ball is now in motion. It has begun rolling downhill, snowball effect. And if Ukraine plays their cards right, we will see a lot of Russian forces being allocated away from Ukraine up to Kursk. And hopefully that will help Ukraine to push Russia back elsewhere within Ukraine itself. A lot of background noise in this video, god damn it. Anyway, that's the end of it. Super crucial, super important what Ukraine has pulled off in Veseloye, pushing up to the west and moving in north to isolating the town from proper supplies, proper support and proper supplies. And it will fall in a few days, would be my guess. And that puts Ukraine in a very good position to moving out to other objectives in the area, which will force Russia to move in even more forces to the area, like I said. So anyway, that's it. I hope you found it interesting. I hope I'll see you in the next one. As always, go på marsch, Ukraine, and give them hell.